There's a lot going on in this story here. So we know there are 4 Gospels: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And John's is a little different in some regards, and I'll hit on some of those along the way. So this is the kind of situate this a little bit. Chapter 21 here, we're after Jesus was crucified and Jesus was resurrected. As it mentioned in the text, the very first verse, after these things, so some time has passed. We have no idea how much time has passed. John does not talk about the ascension. Jesus spent 40 days after the resurrection, before ascending into heaven. John never talks about that. So this could be after the ascension. It could be before the ascension. We simply don't know. It does claim this is the 3rd time that Jesus appeared to the disciples. It's actually the 4th time Jesus appeared, because when the tomb was empty, he appeared to Mary Magdalene. That was the very first appearance. So this is his 4th appearance. And so we're revisioning all of what's happened in John and the Gospels, sort of Jesus' ministry time, because there are a handful of allusions here back to earlier times in this Gospel. The disciples are in a rut. They'd followed Jesus for 3 years, and they're not sure what's going on now. So what did they do? They returned back to their lives. Simon was a fisherman. That's where Jesus found him, fishing, and said, "Follow me." And he did for those 3 years. So what has he done? He's gone back to the beginning. Fishing. They'd gone out, caught no fish. Jesus, or a man, appears and says, "You don't have any fish. Just throw your net on the other side." Not go a mile that way or 750 feet that way. Just throw it to the other side of the boat. And they listened and did it. And behold, they caught 153 large fish. It's a really funny number, right? 153. It basically means a plethora, an abundance, a lot of fish. And to kind of quantify this, if you've ever been on a boat, when I was a kid, we had a 16-foot Boston Whaler powerboat. Now 16 feet is what, like here to the other end of that table. I was out and I caught a fish once. Actually, my dad and I caught fish at the same time. And we each caught bluefish that were like 15 to 16 pounds, which are big fish, right? So if they caught 153 large fish, figure their boats, their road, they're not very big. That's a lot of fish. So it's plenty of fish. So it's not they just caught a couple of fish. No, there's plenty of fish here. Don't worry about that 153. It's just that there was an abundance of fish, many fish, more than they could handle, and yet the net did not break. There's some weirdness, this whole thing with Peter not having any clothes on and suddenly putting clothes on and then jumping in the water and running to shore. So the Sea of Galilee is a shallow, it's a broad body of water, but it's never, I think, more than about 20 feet deep. I'm making that number up, but I think that's an educated guess, sort of anywhere in its whole expanse. So they're 100 yards offshore, but it was probably 4 feet of water or 3 feet of water. My dad grew up in Biloxi, Mississippi, and the ocean there, it goes out, like 1 foot tides, but it goes out half a mile because it's so shallow. So he puts his clothes on and runs to shore because he wants to get to Jesus first. The rest bring the fish along and join. Jesus is already cooking and preparing breakfast. There's an interesting note. It's a charcoal fire. The reason that's interesting is because there are only 2 times that John talks about a charcoal fire in the whole gospel. This is obviously one. The other time is when Peter, as we know, he was the one. Simon Peter was denied Jesus 3 times. So one of those times he was sitting next to a charcoal fire when they said, "You're one of his disciples." And he said, "I am not." So he didn't say he didn't know him. He just said, "I'm not one of his disciples." So there was that negation there by the charcoal fire. Here we are next to a charcoal fire again. And Jesus is talking to him and claiming him. So that's a nice little bookend there. John's gospel never talks about the Last Supper. That just doesn't happen in this gospel. And we sort of assume that we confuse all the gospels sometimes. Oh, of course, we always talk about the Last Supper. That moment never happened. So the other feeding time was the feeding of the 6,000 or 5,000. Every gospel has a little different, whether it's 5,000 or 15,000. An abundance of people, right? So don't get too hung up on some of these numbers. But That's when they had all these fish that appeared and fed everyone, and loaves. And so it is a meal. It is a communal meal. It is a time of fellowship. It is table fellowship. They come together. They're sharing a meal together. That's powerful. Think about your family meals. Think about when you sit down with someone. It's always, if you have a table and you're eating something good, your conversations are always a little more relaxed. You learn a little more. It's a little easier to get along. Table fellowship is huge. That's why I spend most of my time in the dining hall at work. That's the joke. Is he in his office? Did you try the dining hall? Because I'll go and I'll have lunch and then second lunch and third lunch and dessert. Just move table to table because I can find people. I can sit and talk to them. And often their guards are down or they're willing to engage a little differently than if I stop in the hall. Hey, I want to talk to you. So never underestimate the power of having a cup of coffee with someone or a meal of some kind. So I talked about this after these things, kind of this nebulous time period, not rushed. That verse 15, when they had finished breakfast. It doesn't say, Jesus didn't start in on them like in the middle of breakfast. Hey, I want to talk to you about some things you said. They took their time. They enjoyed themselves. They didn't rush. There are moments when that's important in life. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus started asking Simon Peter some questions. Do you love me? Of course I love you. Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Didn't I just tell you I love you? I love you. Tend my flock. Do you love me? 3 times. Why are you asking me this again? Okay, now here are a couple reasons. One, Peter denied him 3 times, right? So in some ways that's refuting the 3 times. The other is in chapter 10 of John's Gospel is when Jesus talks about being the shepherd and talks about tending the sheep, feeding the flock. We've heard that Simon Peter is the rock upon which the church will be built. Jesus said that of him. Jesus is transferring some of his ministerial powers to Peter and the disciples in this moment. This is a new calling. When I was in seminary, everyone had a call story. Why are you in seminary? Why are you getting an MDiv? Why do you want to be a pastor? Oh, I was working in business, and one day Jesus hit me upside the head with a 2x4 that I should be a servant leader, and you have a whole story about how you got to that point and why. That's not just a pastor thing, by the way. We are all servant leaders. We are all called, the priesthood of all believers is an expression that we talk about, particularly in the Presbyterian church, but I think as Christians, we are all called to serve. And I bet that you all have a story in some way of something that happened that spoke to you where you realized, and often it's not that you had this moment, this flash of light where Jesus said, I need you to do this for me. It's someone else said, gosh, I saw you interacting with this person. You have an incredible gift. Have you ever considered exploring this? That's how it was for me. It was not so much I'm going to seminary, I want to be a pastor. Or someone else said, you should think about this. I was like, wow, I actually had thought about that, and I'd never really entertained it fully because it seemed like a crazy idea. People around us sometimes are much more intuitive. They can listen better about us than we can listen about ourselves, right? So Peter, who was probably feeling pretty down and out because of all the things he denied and not done, even being promised all this stuff, suddenly here he is in front of Jesus, and Jesus is saying, by the way, you need to do these things. And I'm not going to dwell on this whole bit at the end here where he said, and here's the kind of death you're going to have because people are going to lead you away and you're going to die. That's an extreme version of this, which will come up later in Acts. But that cost of discipleship is powerful and challenging and hard, and sometimes will force us to make choices. The point is that we all have gifts and skills, and that Jesus is working through us. And even as sometimes we think we've heard God's call and we know clearly what's going on, if we hear something and then just focus on, this is what I'm doing, I'm done, boom, you might be missing on how God might be calling you anew to do other things. In the Acts text that Aaron read in that second piece there, we heard about Saul. And here's another one of those words, meanwhile, is how that verse started out. Meanwhile, Saul still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord. Saul was the ultimate persecutor. He was very good at his job. He was finding Christians and literally snuffing them out. He was really good at this. And Jesus basically smacked him upside the head and said, "What are you doing? Cut it out, man. It's not what I have. That's not how I'm going to use you in this world." The part we didn't hear is that, so Saul is made blind in this moment by Jesus and led to a building. And the people traveling with Saul, who were his aides, saw this and heard Jesus' voice calling out to him saying, "What are you doing? Why are you persecuting me?" And they all heard it and they were like, "Okay, we don't know what's going on." They got led someplace, and then Jesus calls out to Ananias, who's a disciple, and said, "There's this guy named Saul, you need to go visit him." And Ananias says, No, I don't. I know who this guy is. I don't want any part of talking to him. He is a bad person. My health, my life is in jeopardy if I go and talk to him. No, Ananias, you are really going to do this. You need to trust me. But you need to go and you need to lay your hands on him, anoint him, and claim him as mine. Whew. Okay. So Ananias did, and Saul became Paul. While not one of the original apostles, you could argue perhaps has the most profound faith on the development of the early church of anyone, which is why he's had this great book deal and has so many in the Bible, right, of all these different letters and stuff. Throughout Scripture, God uses some really weird people to do amazing things. Everywhere you look. Jonah, you're going to go and talk to these people. No, I'm not. I'm going the other way. I'm going to get swallowed up by this fish and do whatever. Fine, I'll go. King David did some bad things in life. First of all, he never should have been anointed. He was the youngest. He was the runt of the litter. He was the 8th son. 8th is not a biblical number. 7 maybe. First, yes. 7 maybe. But 8th? Come on. This David should never have been anywhere. And then he did bad things, and yet God worked through him in incredible ways. Who would have thought that Saul, the ultimate persecutor, would have been the one to become Paul, to shape the early church and have such an impact on the future of the growth of Christianity? Who would have thought that Peter, who sat there and said, "Nope, not me, don't know him, wasn't me, never seen the guy," would be the one who was foundational on the start of the church? They listened. They heard God's calling on their lives, sometimes when they weren't ready for it and didn't want to hear it. These are the lessons that we get out of these texts today. Whether you like it or not, God is calling to you. God is reaching out to each and every one of you. You have incredible gifts and skills to be used in the service of the Lord. Ways, some of which I bet you imagine, some of which you don't. You will get called into bizarre and crazy circumstances sometimes, and you may find yourself saying, "Why am I here?" Go with it. Be yourself, be true, and know that you probably are having an impact on someone whether you realize it or not. After I led the 9 o'clock service, a friend texted me at about 10:15, said, "Hey, I really appreciated your sermon. I got this and this and this out of it." And I was like, "Okay, I didn't know I was being live streamed." Thanks, I appreciate that. And so it was one of those moments, you never know who's listening. You never know who's going to hear and the impact you may have had. At graduation last year, I had a student come up to me and say, "I never would have made it through without you." And I thought, I had maybe 4 conversations with her in passing. I don't remember them anything being profound or life-changing. Wow, I had no idea. I didn't point her out in the last service, so I'm going to point her out this time. Melissa always comes to me with stories of just crazy stuff that happens to her, right? But she's like, "Okay, I got here and this happened and this is what came out of it." I was like, wow, God is using you. I think you'll find this happening in each of your lives. You may just not be aware of it. And so what's helpful is sometimes if you see it in someone else around you, don't go, "Oh my gosh, did you see what just happened?" Say, "Aaron, that was amazing. You know what I saw? This happened in that moment, and I saw this over here." Because Erin may have no idea what she's doing and why she's doing it and how the Lord is calling her. And so to hear that is reaffirming, like, okay, maybe what I'm doing is okay. Maybe I'm doing this life thing. Maybe I'm doing this faith thing okay. Maybe I just need to listen a little more and be a little more open to how God is calling me to be and do in the world. I can't begin to imagine what the disciples were going through, having been on that 3-year journey to see Jesus killed in front of them and then go through the resurrection and the reappearance and go, okay, what next? But then to encounter once more and be willing to hear and listen and say, I get it, or maybe I don't get it. But discipleship and leadership has changed, and I'm being called again in a new and different way. That was all practice. That wasn't the deal. That was the dress rehearsal. And now I'm ready to go. I still have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm ready to go. You know, it's like help my, I believe, help my unbelief. You know, that kind of thing of like, I don't know what I'm doing, Lord. I'm not sure I believe in some of this stuff. I don't know what's happening, but gosh, if you work through me, I'll do what I can. That's me on any given Sunday when I'm sitting in a place like this. Is like, I always question, what do I have to say? And it's not me. It's listening for the Spirit and trying to reflect on what is coming through this text that is calling to us in this day and age. We live in a world where people need this good news. People need this message. They need to know about Jesus. They need to know the peace of the Lord. And if we can live our lives in that way of embracing and spreading and sharing, goodness, let's do all that we can to make that happen. So I hope you hear these texts and use them as empowering to you. It's okay to be vulnerable. It's okay to be still and listen. Don't assume you know the answers, right? Meanwhile, this happened. Some of this was going on. Time passed. In the moment, sometimes you won't have the right answer. Just rely and know that you are not alone. That Christ, through the Holy Spirit, is walking with you and nurturing you and providing what you need. And know that that's enough. And may you take these words, and live them out this day and the days ahead. Amen.